Fildebrandt, publisher of the Western Standard, and you're watching The Pipeline. Today is May 31st, 2023, E-Day -2. It's been 2 days since the big election. The UCP has won, but now what? We're going to be talking about the new shape of Alberta's political map. The UCP might have painted it still mostly blue. There's a lot more orange on it, and we're going to talk about the changing political geography and demography of Alberta's political map now. We're going to talk about what kind of premier we can expect Smith to be now, because we've seen different kinds of Smith. We've seen radio show Smith, we saw Wild Rose Smith, radio show Smith, UCP leadership Smith, election Smith, and then election night Smith. We're going to predict what Smith we're likely to see over the next 4 years. And we're also going to talk, though, about the future of the NDP and Rachel Notley herself. The NDP set a record number of votes for that party in this province, even though they did not manage to form government. We're going to talk about the future has in store for them. But before we do that, we got to thank, as usual, my favorite sponsor, the Canadian Shooting Sports Association. I've been a member of the CSSA for over a decade because I trust them to defend my rights as a firearms owner in Canada. Gun owner rights in Canada are under constant attack by the federal government, and the Canadian Shooting Sports Association is the most powerful thing standing in the way between you and the federal government taking your lawful guns away. If you're not a member of the CSSA yet, go to CSSA-CILA right now, or do like I do and Google it and become a member. It is critical that gun owners stand together and join together in a group like the Canadian Shooting Sports Association. Okay, so we're going to get into it. The UCP had a pretty good night. They formed a majority government. They've got a reasonably comfortable margin of seats, but they did lose a substantial number, Dave.
They did. Hi, I'm Dave Naylor, news editor of the Western Standard. I'm joined here by our senior columnist, Cory Morgan.
I'm going to
just in case you were wondering.
I'll introduce these two hosers at the end of the show.
There you go. I'm sorry, what was the question again?
UCP won. They've still got a fairly comfortable margin, but they lost a fair number of seats. Maybe kind of set the lay of the land just about where those losses were, where the NDP picked up.
Well, the NDP picked up mainly in Calgary, Derek, turning basically the city into half UCP, half NDP, cut in line by the river. If you're north of the river, you're NDP. If you're south, you're UCP for the most part. The UCP won all the rurals, so you basically got rurals versus two cities. It's Edmonton and Calgary versus the rurals. So, Premier Smith has no Edmonton representation whatsoever. We had a story yesterday that she's going to form a Council of the Defeated. I assume she's going to take Edmonton candidates like Casey Madhu, the former premier, and some other deputy premier, and some other well thought of candidates, and they will become her Edmonton advisors. So, yeah, it's going to be some interesting times.
Cory, the NDP path to victory was always very narrow because they're just such an almost purely urban party. They picked up Casey Madhu's seat, the one UCP seat in Edmonton. He's gone. There's one. So now they're back, like in 2015, to taking every seat in Edmonton. And then they picked up a de facto Edmonton seat, Sherwood Park. But they failed to pick up Strathcona Sherwood Park. Big path to their victory needed to be winning the donut around Edmonton, which they won in 2015, but still totally locked out of even ex-urban Edmonton there, just not picking up anything. The only seat, when you look at the grand map of Alberta, you can't see any orange at all. It doesn't look like the NDP won a single seat because they're all urban, with one lone exception where you hang your hat in Banff, Kananaskis. Shame on you, Cory.
I did my part. There's only so many. Only so many times they let me in.
They only let you vote a few times, eh? Yeah. But the NDP's path to victory was just like they had to sweep Calgary, and they did win just a bare majority, actually, of Calgary seats. I think like 24 of 26, something like that. But I don't know. Do you think this kind of permanently upends what we think of Calgary? Because the only time the NDP has won a lot in Calgary before was 2015, when they could rely on so-called vote splits between Wild Rose and Progressive Conservatives. They brought the Alberta Party vote behind them. But what do you think this is telling us about the political geography of Alberta now?
I don't think it's changed as much as some might think. As you kind of mentioned, the Alberta Party and the Liberals, they were always there, and they were always kind of cutting things up, and they were not a factor this time. I think some people brought up that was traditionally like 170,000 votes. That's more than enough to change a whole lot of the outcomes and races across this province. So as you said, this is a high watermark, and yes, it was dearly close. A number of those ridings on both sides. I mean, some people said, "Oh, well, if the NDP just had an extra few thousand votes, it would have changed the whole thing." That's true, but if the UCP just had a few thousand votes and they would have had 8 more as well. But it was very, very close. But how are they going to capture more? I mean, there's a chance as there's already people hoping that the Smith government will implode somehow in the next 4 years. But I don't.
They are conservatives. They are likely to implode.
They
over
like
4
doing
years.
that, yeah. So, but there's not much else more they can grab. I mean, the popular vote was still over 50% for the UCP. There was no other factor splitting the NDP vote. They had as good a leader as they've ever had and probably ever will, at least for the foreseeable future. I don't see how they can climb much higher after this. Plus, the unknown factor of Smith will be gone by the time the next election, whatever it might be. Could be that they know they don't want her, or it could, if she's just stable, I think for 4 years she'll recapture a lot of Calgary.
Dave, Calgary is, I was saying, it's split pretty much 50-50 at this point. Now that's not quite as much as the NDP had in 2015 when they won, but the NDP won a higher share of the vote than they did actually in 2015. And the UCP, between the combined Wild Rose and PC and the UCP in 2019 and the UCP this time, it's actually been pretty steady. I guess we're going to actually, I mean, if we have time, we actually want to get into smaller parties later. But I guess the big thing is now it's such a strict 2-party system. Smith got a higher percentage of the vote here than possibly even Klein ever got.
She did, yes.
But Klein
and Lloyd.
Yeah. The difference is, Lloyd had one election where he won literally almost every single seat. The difference is you would always have a divided opposition splitting up that vote. Now it's your blue team or your orange team, and that's it. Do you think this will perhaps change just how Calgary views itself as this conservative bastion now?
Well, I think that view is long gone. I think we had the 28-year reign of his purpleness, and he was certainly left wing. We've got Jody Gondek, climate crusader, to the tune of $60+ billion. So I think the stigma that Calgary is a conservative town, I don't think is there anymore.
Well, Calgary's
certainly
always
federally
elected, normally moderate lefty, not normally like Jody Gondek left, but Calgary's often had left, and the kind of thinking was, well, if they had party labels next to them, the lefties would never win at the mayor's chair.
Sure.
Now we're seeing, the NDP and UCP, when their party brands are on the table, they're pretty evenly matched in Calgary.
Yeah,
and that's a new thing.
If hopefully the diversification that the UCP and the bringing in of businesses by hopefully by the billions, they'll be bringing in oil workers and high-tech workers who are not likely to be NDP supporters, but more supporters of the UCP. So, and just the social problems that Cory has detailed on Nazim in Calgary, I think that they're only going to get worse at the moment. And I think that's going to take a lot of the NDP sting away, because people are just going to get fed up of it.
So I'm going to come back more to geography again, but maybe the higher level again. You heard a lot of the legacy media. They were saying, "Oh, the UCP is not going to be able to be very representative because they don't have all the seats in Calgary. They've got 12-ish, maybe up to 14, depending on recounts. But let's just say 12 seats in Calgary, half the seats." And but otherwise they're all rural. Although the UCP does have the entire donut around Calgary, so like Strathcona, Sherwood Park. What's his name? It's not Jordan Walker, is that? Well, anyway, the UCP guy representing Strathcona, Sherwood Park. That guy's going to be in cabinet because it's a de facto Edmonton seat. But they were saying that the UCP is such a rural party. It's got just one leg of the stool, but it's still, despite losing a bunch of seats, it still seems to me to be still much more geographically and demographically diverse than the NDP is. The NDP is purely urban. It is Edmonton. It is generally inner and northeast Calgary, and I guess the weird asterisk riding that where you are from, Banff, Kananaskis, where you've got kind of the Banff Canmore kind of culture in it. The NDP just seems so locked geographically and demographically because it just has no appeal outside the two cities.
No, and that's again where I feel a little more, as you said, the high water mark has been sort of hit. I mean, they could potentially gain more ground in Calgary, but Calgary has room to move. The UCP can capture more of Calgary. They've got room to expand, and maybe they could eke out another couple seats at Edmonton down the road. But the day that the NDP wins something like Olds Didsbury or Grand Prairie or Highwood is not going to be coming anytime soon.
Yeah. So for the NDP to win, the NDP didn't come. I'll have to dig in the numbers a little bit more, but other than Banff Kananaskis, which the NDP ever so barely won, and it is only technically a rural riding. It's largely kind of a weird ex-urban riding. But they didn't. I have to dig in the numbers, but unless I'm mistaken, I don't think they came close anywhere in Alberta other than Banff Kananaskis outside of the two big cities. They weren't even competitive. Whereas the UCP was in a few Edmonton ridings. I mean, you could see them one day maybe winning some Edmonton ridings, and a ton of Calgary ridings that the UCP were competitive in. Whereas the NDP, Dave, is just utterly not in the universe of most seats outside of Calgary and Edmonton, and I just don't see how they're going to have ever a reasonable path to victory unless they can become competitive outside the two big cities.
No, and it shows you how hated their farm bill was, Bill 6, I think it was.
It's not just that. You got Red Deer.
Yeah.
People in Red Deer, in Medicine Hat, in Grand Prairie, they're not mostly farmers, but they're small urban. And, and the NDP are just not resonating there.
No, they're not. And how do they change their message without abandoning, what they are as a party, where their history's being. And, I'm sure we're going to get to Miss Notley later on, but the only way they're going to change that is to attract a candidate, a leadership candidate that can be sold in those places. But as of right now, there's no way they're winning in rural Alberta.
Well, I think you alluded quite correctly that I was maybe getting a little ahead of ourselves too, talking about the future of the NDP and Notley, but I think there's a lot more we can cover there in a bit. But let's talk about Smith for now. We've seen different kinds of Smith. I mean, there was, the policy wonk Smith before she entered politics at all. Then there was kind of the charming, populist, right-wing rural Smith you saw when she was Wild Rose leader. Then there was Radio Show Smith, real gadfly, controversial, likes to stir the pot, have a conversation. And then UCP leadership candidate Smith, who was populist crusader, pretty much dressed with a Viking helmet there to storm the gates. And then UCP premier and election Smith, which was trying to calm the waters and make sure everyone knows that she's not nuts. But election night, she kind of hinted about, remember guys, we're taking on Ottawa, we're doing this stuff. In an interview she's given since, she's even hinted pretty strongly that if Ottawa tries to cap emissions, that would be a de facto production cap on oil and gas in Alberta, should consider using the Sovereignty Act, the big nuke. And we didn't hear too much about that during the election. Cory, which Danielle Smith do you think is going to show up over the next few years?
I think she can only suppress the ideological Danielle Smith for so long. I'm not so worried about that, too, because I do believe a lot of her policies, if implemented properly, will show benefit if she brings them in. I mean, the healthcare savings account could be very interesting and beneficial. Some of the treatment-based things for addicts. I mean, if those start showing results, it's going to look good for her. Fighting against Ottawa is always a win, even if you lose the battle. Just got to wonder, my bigger concern is how well the manager, Danielle Smith, is of the caucus of the others, and having, worked with her to a degree with the Wild Rose when she was leading that, and I was in the executive. I would hope in her time out from politics, she's humbled a bit and realized that, again, if you lose the support below you, it doesn't matter what you're doing. You could really, conservatives learn that all the time. you can lose it all. So I'd be watching much more closely with how her internal management's going on than her policy right now.
Dave, I'm going to put the same question to you. I think Danielle Smith has generally always been herself, but she'll lean into different aspects of herself. And one of the NDP was trying to shape the ballot question to be Danielle Smith can't be trusted. She's crazy. So obviously she leans strongly against that, kind of counterattacking it, trying to demonstrate she's reasonable and clear-headed. But do you think she's going to continue more in that personality of just like, don't really do much over 4 years, just try not to rock the boat and be kind of quiet? Or do you think she'll be kind of one of those genuinely transformative premiers that, you are likely to see an Alberta police force, an Alberta pension plan, an Alberta revenue agency, potential use of invocation of the Sovereignty Act?
I don't think it's in her nature to be quiet and just ride out 4 years. I think Jen Gerson said it best in her column this morning. She's either going to last 18 months or she's going to last 8 years. She's got a couple of big decisions ahead of her, including a cabinet. She needs to find a health minister, because that'll be probably her most important nomination. She needs to find a finance minister with the retirement of Travis Taves. But I think if she's the premier that she says she wants to be for all Albertans and has listened to people and will listen to the people, I think you may see the provincial police force fall away, because I don't think the majority of Albertans want that. Our own tax agency, maybe, sure. And certainly the fight against Ottawa and Trudeau, definitely. And she said she's, girding for that fight already, as you said, Derek, in her acceptance speech. So it's all to be determined, but, hopefully we've got, her not going off the reservation by herself, but listening to everybody around her and surrounding herself with smart people, which I don't think the last premier probably did to his best abilities.
We talked about this a fair bit on election night. The longevity of Alberta Conservative premiers is not very long. The last time an Alberta Conservative premier in Alberta finished a single term, I was in high school, was Ralph Klein, 2004. And the last time an Alberta premier retired without being pushed out by the electorate or their party was when the year I was born, 1985, when Peter Lougheed retired. There's nothing like this anywhere else in Canada. Being the Alberta Conservative leader is a death wish. It's a political death wish. It might be a cool job, but it is not there for the long term generally. Eventually, I believe, at some point in our history, in my lifetime at least, there will be an Alberta Conservative premier who completes a 4-year term. It will happen before I die, I'm sure. And I know it's an impossible prediction right now, so I'm not going to ask you to predict because events come. But maybe we'll start with you, Cory. What do you think the really big, maybe say 2 things Danielle Smith needs to do to make it to the next election and be the first Alberta Conservative since 2004 to actually complete a term and make it to at least an opportunity to get reelected?
Number one is listen to and genuinely respect her caucus. And, it was something she said on her show many a time, actually. She said one of the things she learned, if you've lost your caucus, you're done. If that's what she felt happened with the Wildrose, even in opposition. That seems to have been driven home.
She doesn't even start with a ton of caucus support. There's a lot of elements in that caucus that never really were her biggest fan.
Potentially, but now they've just come through a tight election. I mean, they shouldn't be too motivated to be trying to rip things down early. That there's not,
you haven't been talking to some of these guys like me.
Oh yeah, there's some discontent.
Some of them will be trying,
and I would just hope she can keep them contained because she has to.
So what's number 2?
Number 2 is making sure something doesn't fire up in her right flank. Right now, the alternative parties, there's nothing to speak of going on over there. But that's part of what really was the hindrance for Stelmach, the hindrance for Prentice, the hindrance for Redford was this growing Wildrose going on over there that was taking an element of them and a bite out of their policies and giving a home to the discontented to go towards. If they got nowhere to go, they'll grumble and stay in caucus. But so she's got to make sure a fire doesn't light outside of her own party as well. So she's going to have to juggle those 2 things, and she can maintain, I think, for 4 years.
I know, like Ralph Klein, was always very cautious. You know, you can't govern on the fringes, but whenever he saw any significant stirring on his right flank, he'd turn like the guns of the Missouri, just, and he'd point some guns and blast it. He would do something to bring those people decisively back in, mostly successfully. Paul Hinman was actually first elected as Alberta Alliance in 2004, Klein's last election, but he was always careful to try and bring those guys back in. Whereas I think his successors generally just took it for granted that there's not allowed to be anything on my right flank. We're the Conservatives, for God's sakes. And obviously that was not a very good long-term strategy. Dave, same question to you. What are the two big things Danielle Smith needs to do to have the best possible chance of being the first Conservative premier since Ralph Klein to actually make it to an attempt to get reelected?
Well, Cory's hit the nail on the head. It's all about caucus control. And I think if she can play the Trudeau card properly and fight that battle correctly, then I think that eliminates the parties on the right, like the independence parties and whatnot. And those voters will stay with them. And if she can keep caucus under control, then in terms of issues, it's economy and health. If she runs those two files well, she can be premier as long as she wants. Because I think we've seen all the NDP can throw at her. There's not going to be more secret recordings of her talking about selling off hospitals or. Oh,
you haven't seen what I got.
Yeah, we haven't even opened up our closet yet. But you know, the UCP did their best. Sorry, the NDP did their best to discredit her, and they lost. And I kind of agree with what Cory was saying. Even though there may be some UCP caucus members who aren't her fans, I don't think right now there's an appetite for another election.
Well, no. There's election
or
and there's leadership.
There's a difference. Or leadership. You know what? If you push it too many times, I know we've talked about it in the past. You almost look like an Italian government. You know, changing the head every 2 or 3 years.
But we do that.
I know.
We have been doing that since 2004.
And to be honest, I think voters get sick of it. They want to see some stability.
But in every one of those elections since 2004, except for 2015, they have elected Conservatives. And some have argued, actually, that was the great trick to Conservative longevity. Premier gets unpopular, kill the Premier, bring in someone else, call an election, everyone votes for the new guy gets unpopular, kill that guy, and rinse and repeat.
Yeah, but it's not the population that's killing the guy. It's the small percentage of party members.
But generally, the leaders they take down are unpopular, both with the party and, importantly, with the general population when they do it. And so I think that's another one of the things that for a caucus to turn on a leader, they're unlikely to do it, I think, while the party's high in the polls. Am I going to keep my seat? Yeah. Okay. Well, probably continue along. Although there's a lot of ego stuff like, am I in cabinet? If you're in cabinet, you probably want to support the current leadership. If not, well, maybe you want a new leader who appreciates how truly talented you are and why you should be in cabinet. But unpopular premiers are more likely to get taken down. But remember with Kenny never lost caucus. He lost some of caucus and increasingly lost a fair chunk of it, but he never lost an outright majority of caucus. Caucus didn't oust him. It was the grassroots of the party and new members who signed up who were white hot angry at him that took him down. In contrast to Stelmach, that was caucus. Redford, caucus. Prentice was himself and the election. But Kenny was not caucus. That was an insurgency of the grassroots. It was very different. And those two things often have very different interests. The grassroots tend to be more ideological, more passionate, whereas caucus, I mean, this might not sound nice, but is more concerned about self-preservation and getting reelected or getting into cabinet.
Well, keep in mind, you had those, 21, 22 MPs that wrote that letter complaining about the lockdown. Mm-hmm. You had very, very close caucus votes when they were talking about expelling Todd Loewen. It was more unanimous with Drew Barnes, but it was close with Todd Loewen. Mm-hmm. So he surely did not have the backing of all or the full amount of his caucus. No. You know, he maybe had 50 to 55, 60% who would support him, you know, and who knows what happens when you don't have to identify yourself in a vote where you're going to go. Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, let's talk about the future of the NDP and Rachel Notley. Maybe those things are going to continue to be the same thing. Maybe not. So Monday night, Rachel Notley said that she is staying on as opposition leader. Now, she did not say, and I'm going to be here fighting in 4 years. And that's actually, I think, fair. She does not need to decide that night rashly, I'm resigning immediately, or I'm going to be running for premier for a fourth time in 4 years. I think it's fine. She's, Alberta Conservatives, if they lose, they have to resign that night. That's over. They don't have to go full Prentice and refuse to even take their seat in the legislature. That was maybe a bit extreme, but NDP leaders, I think, are granted a bit more leeway on that kind of thing. I think it's a complicated question about if she should stay or not. I think she's around 60 years old or so.
Yeah, she's 60. I think she was born in 63.
Yeah, so she's around 60 years old. Not a spring chicken, but also there's many politicians who are significantly older. So, she's still got time if she wants to. But she was first elected in 2008 and served in the 2-member NDP caucus. Then 2012, served in the 4-member NDP caucus. And then 2015 was her high water mark as premier. But then since then, but she's now run for premier 3 times already as leader. 2015 where she won, 2019 where she lost, 2023 where she's lost. I guess 2-part question. Maybe you'll answer the same for both, maybe differently. I'll start with you, Cory. Your best bet, will Rachel Notley make a 4th attempt for the premier's chair? And should she, if you are her in the NDP?
Yeah, this is a guess on my part, of course. I don't think she's going to. She's doing it in a controlled way. She cares for the party. I mean, you don't have to step down that night. You can go 6 months, maybe a year even. Just say, okay, it's time, and we can have a race and rejuvenate and do it in a calm and not as fractious manner as a sudden race. Because she's got to be getting a bit tired. I mean, she's looking tired. She's put a lot in, and there's nothing more she could throw at the next race. If she could think of something, perhaps, I don't think she wants to run for opposition leader again. She only wants to run for premier again. So what could she do that would be different, even if it's a different UCP leader in 4 years, that might get her over that line? And there's not really anything outstanding. We sort of covered that earlier. Likewise, should she stay in? I think for her own sake and for the NDP's sake, I think not. Some people keep saying, well, who else is there? Well, there's names out there, and there's people, but the opening has to come. And they will surface, whether, it was a long shot speculation, but I don't say it's impossible for Ned Nenshi to throw his hat in looking at something like that. Or you might have Shannon Phillips or Janice Irwin go in. Well, a race with those 3 would show, do you want a campaign to be opposition or do you want a campaign to become government? It would be a potentially rejuvenating effort on the part of the party to figure out really what their path is and what they're going to go with.
Again, I'm asking you both sometimes a lot of the same questions today because there's a lot of different perspectives on it. If you are Rachel Notley, do you think, what are the chances, should you run and will you run?
Should she run? No. Will she run? No. I think, as you said, Derek, I think she was probably a little bit shocked, a little bit upset on Monday night. Didn't want to say anything rash, even though I thought she might. She's going to take her time and make the best decision for her personally. She did exhaust herself in the campaign. She did everything she could. She had no more left to give at the end of the day. So she'll, the only way I see her to stay is if the party begs her and says, look, we need you. We got nobody else, which I don't think is true. So I think after, in the cold light of day, she will resign. There'll be the leadership convention. Will it be a coronation of Ned Nenshi? Will it be Janice Irwin? Will it be somebody that
we're going to talk about replacements soon?
We haven't thought of yet. So I think she's going to go.
I think it's most likely, but it's also probably it's the best job she's ever had, short of being premier, I guess, and very possibly the best job she will ever have. But it's hard to, it's not like the Senate where you can really mail it in. But opposition leader, you could mail it in, but that means if she's going to mail in, if she's just going to kind of take it easy, it means they'll probably lose seats next time. They definitely will not form government. But, this is Alberta. New Democrat leaders are not expected to win 100% of the time as a matter of course. They're granted some leeway. But, 2015, they tasted power. and they like the taste, as most do. So what is the, let's talk about, actually, we're going to talk about this, and then we're going to talk about individual replacements, because these two, I think, are related. The NDP, in most provinces and federally, kind of views itself as the conscience of Parliament. They're not supposed to win, but they're supposed to be there and be the really good guys, and normally kind of force the other parties, namely the Liberals, to implement their great, more aggressively left-leaning policies. And there's exceptions. In BC, they compete to win. In Manitoba, they compete to win. In Saskatchewan, well, they kind of think they compete to win. And maybe they will again one day. But generally, the NDP is the third party, and it's there to be the conscious. Do you think the NDP is going to look at this and think, God, we got more votes than the time we won in 2015, and we still lost. And frankly, if you look at the math of it, even if we got as many votes as the UCP, we probably still would have narrowly lost, because this is Alberta, and they just hate us so badly outside the two big cities and in southern Calgary. If you're the NDP, Cory, you look at this, do you say, why should we bother trying to water ourselves down? Why don't we just be ourselves? Except we're not going to be in government. And maybe we'll have a few less seats, but we could still have a big opposition caucus and really just be ourselves and true to our principles. Or do you think they look at this and say, so close, we can do it. We've just got to get the right leader who is perceived as more Calgary friendly, maybe more rural friendly, more moderate than Rachel Notley. Which lesson do you think they're going to draw from this? Because they could draw either from it.
Well, I think all of them are having to make that personal decision. I think the political thinkers among them, member-wise, all the way up to the caucus members, know that that's the choice they're sitting at. Now, they've maxed out in their current incarnation. So if they want to go for the big ring, they got to change something.
Well, actually, I'm going to interrupt. I'm sorry. I don't mean to interrupt. But there's maybe a third one. And sometimes conservatives often draw this, which is we lost because we were too moderate. We didn't inspire people to vote enough. The Conservatives made that choice when they elected Danielle Smith. They went to the right of Jason Kenney and said, we're losing because Jason Kenney is this mushy and we're losing people to the right. Now, the NDP does not face anything on their left. But I suppose the third lesson they could draw is we were too milquetoast. We were too moderate, and we need to be more lefty, more progressive, because that'll inspire people in bigger numbers, and that'll put us over the top.
So it won't put you over the top in the rural areas.
I agree. But in Calgary, maybe.
Well, I don't know about Calgary. I mean, I think if any of their when they finally went to policy and put something out, it was the corporate tax hike, and that fizzled. I mean, that did not resonate with people, and that's getting a little closer to their true roots on what the sort of thing they would go for as a ideologically more pure NDP. That's where I think the big test for them to find out what they want to be the best route would be a leadership race where they could have two competing visions and their own members could choose that between a Todd Hirsch or a Nenshi or a Janice Irwin, or a Shannon Phillips. And then they really will get a measure of their own party. Say, look, guys, do we want to moderate? Do we want to embrace some of the things and move forward? Or can we sleep better at night just by accepting we're going to be opposition, but we're going to be a principled one that sticks to their core values and really hammers it to them? But nothing less, I think, than a leadership race would really help them all examine and choose on something like that.
So you forced me to kind of put that follow-up question to Dave rather than ask him the same question again, but it's very much related. You could take it that way, Dave. The leadership race is ultimately going to determine which lessons I think the NDP learn from this. I think they could say Nenshi or Hirsch will be viewed as Calgary-friendly, moderate relative to NDP. I mean, those guys are on the left, but I mean, they're not wearing Che Guevara watches. They're a different kind of
not
left.
Loyola.
Yeah. They're a different kind of beast. They're seen as not explicitly anti-business. They've had real jobs, kind of thing. Or you have, Shannon Phillips, maybe Sarah Hoffman, Janice Irwin, where they're going to go, and some of them are maybe more radical than others there, but they're going to say, they would probably not say, well, we're never going to win again, so we may as well just be ourselves. They'll never say that out loud. Some of them might think that, but others might say, as I was saying earlier, we didn't win because we weren't hard enough. That didn't inspire people. We were just too boring. Because conservatives sometimes draw that lesson, And sometimes that lesson leads to them winning, and sometimes it leads to them losing. It's kind of dealer's choice. But who do you think the big likely contenders are to replace Rachel Notley? And what do you think each of them, what are the chances you think of them winning? I know we're really kind of handicapping a race that hasn't even theoretically begun.
But I will disagree with one thing you said, where they've got no chance of increasing in the next election. I think they do.
Oh, I think they do.
I think they do, but it's all part of regeneration. You have to come up with a new leader. You have to come up with a new leader who, as you just said, can hold Edmonton while just increasing a few seats in Calgary and maybe a rural one. So is that Naheed Nenshi? A lot of people in Calgary don't like the legacy that he's left. A lot of people still do like him. I think Calgary is a strange city in that they're more progressive, but they draw the line at maybe drag queen story time for children. That's a line that most Calgarians probably don't want to cross, but Janice Irwin would be, one every afternoon in every school. So she would offer the stark NDP platform, but one that would never get elected. So while she may run and become leader of the party, if they do, then I think that kills any chance of them becoming.
They're going back down to the inner core downtowns of the two cities.
Exactly.
Well, that's like I say. I would say there wasn't a chance of them winning at all. It's just if they stay the same as they are.
Exactly. But with some regeneration, a new popular leader that that can take on Premier Smith, assuming she hasn't imploded, then the chances are there. But as with the UCP, they have to be very, very careful with who they select as a leader. Make sure they got the right one that can appeal to those Tory voters, conservative voters.
So my show, I can add whatever I want to it, and I'm adding a section that I think we need to talk a little bit about. Let's give a little bit of time to the small parties. Let's give them some honorable mention. In the 2012, the Liberals collapsed from being a significant opposition party and the official opposition to a tiny opposition party with like 10% of the vote and just 5 seats in the legislature. That was when Wild Rose took over as a fairly sizable official opposition. Then 2015, when it was 2012. 2015, the time the NDP won, the Liberals were reduced to like 2% of the vote and 1 seat, David Swan, an incumbent. And the NDP swallowed almost all the Liberal vote up. By 2019, the Liberals were well and truly gone, 0 seats, probably less than 1% of the vote, roughly. They digested them. But the Alberta Party in 2019 had between 8 and 10% of the vote. Nothing to sneeze at. This time, though, the Alberta Party vanished, vaporized. In fact, by number of votes, the third party in Alberta is the Greens.
0.8%.
0.8%. And that was the third party, not even a percentage.
And the Alberta Party, 0.7%.
Yeah. So I guess I don't even really want to spend time on the Greens. Let's talk about the Alberta Party. For the last time, the media are obsessed with the Alberta Party because they just love it. It's this cute little thing, and it deserves to do so well. It's finally dead. Cory, give us the epitaph of the Alberta Party right now.
Well, finally, the feel-good, we stand for everything and we stand for nothing party has gone to the political dumpster where it belongs. As you said, the media kept pumping their tires as if they were a force, and it would annoy me to no end at every election. And I understand up-and-coming new parties. I've taken part in them, and they've gotten somewhere.
They normally stand for something.
We'd be the official opposition, and we couldn't get 5 minutes of airtime on some stations, and the Alberta Party leader would be there for 5 minutes and polling at 2%. So the reality has come home. Now, I don't know if they're gone for good. A registered entity, the right person can pick it up perhaps and turn it to something, but the conventional media finally recognized that they're no more popular than Pawlowski's little fringe party off to the side there. And
you had to go there. So I guess
had to go there. But, sorry, I know what you're going to say. So
we're going to go there. So I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but I kind of looked through this. Pawlowski ran in Calgary Elbow, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think he got like 160 odd votes. 167,
I believe.
Yeah, something around there.
Enough to knock off a cabinet minister.
Yeah, but that didn't even make a difference in Elbow.
No, I'm sorry. I'm thinking of Acadia.
In Acadia, yeah. But Pulowski's party across all of Alberta, and they ran quite a few candidates, but it was like, what was it, 3,000 votes across like
4,600.
4,600 across all of Alberta.
But after his performance at the legislature the other day, should be must-watch TV.
He swore, oh God, it was good. But he swore he is going to single-handedly bring down Danielle Smith. He has taken down the government. He is going to cost them this election. At best, it seems you can make the case that maybe they cost them Tyler Shandro, who lost by 7 votes, where they had something more than 7 votes there, Dave.
Yeah, and that's exactly. Hopefully they go away and they're never seen and heard from again, because they were taking up too much oxygen on the airwaves.
Solidarity forever.
Solidarity forever, and hopefully he keeps going and feeding the street people and feeding the homeless, because that's to be applauded. But he should give up the political game right now. Because he's already been the head of 3 parties already? He started the Independence Party, and then they fired him.
The Independence Party fired him. So I think just 2.
Just the 2. Okay. Well, that's pretty good in 2
Paul
weeks.
Hinman, who's been the head
in 2 weeks. Yeah, the Alberta Party is looking for a leader.
There we go.
So anyway, hopefully he will never be heard from again.
Cory, we'll talk a matter of expertise for you. I guess this is the last question before we go. But kind of the constellation of further right parties in Alberta. Some of them had very different strategies. Pulowski's Solidarity Forever, its goal was explicitly to split the vote and kill the NDP. Failed. And it's pure cult of personality, the party. But then you have the Alberta Independence Party, which fashions itself a serious party, got virtually no votes, couldn't field candidates, but tried to field candidates. Absolutely nothing. Wild Rose Independence Party, I think intentionally only just ran 2 candidates this time to stay registered. And they actually endorsed the UCP under Danielle Smith, tepidly saying, "Well, vote for them this time, but we're going to be watching them, and we'll be back if she screws up." And then it's really bad. And then Paul Hinman's Wild Rose Loyalty Coalition, which is not a points card for the gas station. That is not a points card, I assure you. He tried to make a big show of it, said he was going to run 30-something candidates, ended up running some fairly small
entertainers. It wasn't a lot.
Yeah, less than half of what he said he would run. Kind of general. You could pick from one, or you could talk about them all in aggregate, but your thought about kind of the constellation of small parties. And there is more. There's Buffalo, there's Reform.
The Advantage Party.
Alberta Advantage. There's
just a shotgun blast of these little parties all over the wall right now, and none of them have any traction. None. It's time for Paul to hang up his boots, and I like Paul, always have, but that's enough. In his own of Karsten Warner, where he's got a fair network and connection and name recognition, he pulled, I think, 300 and some seats.
Votes,
votes, yeah. So
Paul Hinman for supermajority.
Yeah. So, there's just not an appetite for an alternative right party at this time. Some of them might want to try and continue maintenance, keep a skeleton crew, and see if it'll turn into something down the road. But it's not a factor right now for sure. And I don't see it coming to be a factor anytime soon. Basically, the thing that would feed that is if Smith starts tilting hard left, and I can't see that happening anytime soon.
A lot of people couldn't have seen Jason Kenney doing it.
True enough. Nothing's impossible in Alberta politics, so you can't write anything off.
Yeah, I would generally agree, but if it's impossible, it will probably happen.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we're out of time. We're going to wrap it up there. Thank you, Cory. Thank you, Nigel. By the way, introducing Dave Naylor, news editor.
I'm not Nigel.
You're not.
No, you just called me Nigel.
Did I say Nigel?
You did.
I think I said Dave.
No, you said Nigel.
You're not even.
We can go back on the tape if you
I'm
want.
only introducing Sean Polzer here.
Yes.
Sean, Alberta reporter. But Dave and
all.
Cory are not welcome here. They're not getting introduced at all here today. Thank you very much for joining us. If you're not yet a member of the Western Standard, go to westernstandard.news. Sign up. It's only $10 a month or $100 a year for unlimited Western Standard government bailout-free content. Thank you very much for joining us today. God bless.
Here's an update on commodity prices in Lethbridge for today. Cash barley is down $2 at $4.03. Feed wheat is down $2 at $4.04. And corn is down $3 at $3.93 per metric ton. In the milling wheat markets, July Minneapolis futures are lower 11 3/4 cents at $7.81 per bushel. with local hard red spring bid for May movement at 10.47. Looking at canola, nearby futures dropped $7.60 at 6.50.60 per ton, with delivered values for June movement at 14.97 per bushel. In the pulse markets, nearby red lentil prices are trading at 33 cents per pound, and yellow peas are holding at 11.25 per bushel. And in the cattle markets, August live cattle added 17.5 cents at 167.35 per hundredweight. For more information on pricing or picked up options, give me a call at 403-394-1711. I'm Matt Musicum at Marketplace Commodities, accurate real-time marketing information and pricing options.
Canadian Shooting Sports Association. Without the CSSA, our gun rights would have been taken long ago. These guys are on the front lines helping to draft smart and intelligent firearms regulations and legislation in Canada, and more importantly, educating the public about how we keep guns out of the hands of the wrong people. To become a member, it's absolutely worth every penny. You can become a Western Standard member for just $10 a month or $99 a year for unlimited access